A.G. Lafley, thanks for joining me. We're talking about your new book that's out now called Playing to Win, how strategy really works. So you outline in the book, obviously, sort of the core tenets of effective business strategy through the lens of your experience as CEO of Procter & Gamble. What are the universal truths of effective business strategy?
Effective business strategies are essentially choices to win in the marketplace with a very specific group of customers or consumers.
And I would argue that most people probably think that's what they're always doing, right? Even when they're choosing the wrong avenues.
I think a lot of folks will tell you that they have a strategy, and they may or may not. Some don't really have one. They may have a vision, they may have a mission, they may have a plan, but they probably don't have a strategy that answers all 5 choices, and I'll come to those in a second. Or they have a strategy, but it's flawed in some way. They're trying to be all things to all people. They're really not making choices. They're not making choices about what is winning or where they're going to play, and as importantly, where they're not going to play.
Right.
How they're really going to win, what really are their core capabilities and competencies to win, and how they're going to measure the progress.
Well, I would argue that those measures have changed, and certainly when we talk about marketing, we talk a lot about how the metrics have shifted so much, and more than ever, marketing organizations have to keep a real clear handle on sort of what their objectives are and how they're measuring for those. Do you think that effective strategy is more now these days of the smaller entrepreneurial startups, or is it necessarily the core ability of the larger companies like a P&G, for example?
Well, I think the fundamental metric for most businesses, and even for a lot of not-for-profits, the fundamental measure of winning is, am I creating a customer? And am I creating more customers? And are my customers more loyal to me? Do they love my product more? Do they love my service more? Do they think it's a better value? And therefore, as a result, do more of them try me, do more of them buy me, and do more of them use me loyally?
Right.
I mean, if you think of the local symphony or the local movie theater or the local playhouse, they're in the business of creating customers that become regular users of their product and service.
Sure.
It's the same thing for P&G, it's the same thing for GE, it's the same thing for a small startup business.
Okay, but now you clearly were at a company where marketing was king, a brand-led business. Can the same be said of a company that isn't so brand-centric?
I think so, because even if you take B2B businesses, industrial product businesses, or business service businesses, they still have customers. They're only successful if they create new customers and more customers. No sales without customers, right? No profit without sales.
Yep.
So I would argue it's just as important. They need to change their mindset a little bit. They tend to be more product driven, more engineering driven, more technology driven.
Right.
And they need to become more market driven, and they need to think about how their industry organizes into customer segments and what those customer segments really want and need.
And
then
that
find a
begs
way
the
to give it to
question,
them.
what's the role of brand at those organizations too?
Well, I think brand is actually becoming more important in B2B organizations, certainly more important in service organizations. We were talking earlier about how law firms need to brand themselves, accounting firms need to brand themselves, all kinds of service. Healthcare increasingly is branding itself. Now, I think a brand is important. A brand fundamentally is a promise to a customer. Why should you purchase my product in preference to all the other choices that you have? If you get the brand right, it's a relationship with the customer. And if you get the brand really right, your customers not only buy you and use you, they become ambassadors for your brand. They tell their friends about you.
Is the strategy, the business strategy that P&G employed when you were there, the right strategy for P&G today?
Broadly, P&G's strategy hasn't changed for 175 years. I mean, P&G is on a differentiated, consumer-focused, branded product strategy. So what's changed over the years? We focus on different industries. The decade that our team had the responsibility for leading the company, we moved out of the food and beverage business. When I joined the company in the mid-'70s, a third of the company was in food and beverages. When I left in 2010, we'd virtually sold off all of the food and beverage businesses because we thought they were commoditizing. They were clearly local businesses, not global businesses. So the industry choices change, and that's part of strategy. We moved deeper into household care, and we moved into personal care, beauty care, and health care in a big way in the last decade. The innovations change.
Right.
Okay. Frankly, the consumer segments change, right? There are new generations of consumers.
And how they interact with the brands in the company, obviously.
Totally
Huge.
different. I mean, the way my mother's generation wants to respond and relate to a brand is quite different than the way my granddaughter wants to respond and relate to a brand.
Right.
So a lot of things change. The marketplace is dynamic. Consumers change. Competition changes. But I think some of the fundamentals, don't really change all that much.
Well, that begs another question. I mean, what are the absolutes when dealing with business strategy, and how much does there need to be that core strategy versus sort of something that's constantly evolving?
Well, I think there are
for any business.
No, I think there are two fundamentals of strategy that are pretty timeless. One part is how do you position yourself versus the other choices the consumer or customer has in the market. And that in our model we call the where to play choice and the how to win choice. And the other part is what are your core capabilities that make you different and more competitive and better. And we talk about that as core competencies or capabilities. And at P&G they were very straightforward. Deeper understanding of consumers, innovation leader in household care and personal care, brand leader, not just building brands that already are established, but creating new brands every decade. The ability to partner with our customers and our suppliers and other innovators. And finally, the ability to scale our learning on a global basis. Those were our 5 core competencies. And they were decisive in our industry, and they distinguished us. When we really did them well, we were successful with consumers in the market.
Right, but at the same time you have that sort of core basis, there needs to be obviously evolution.
Constant evolution and change. And the evolution and change comes, I think, in 2 big areas. The consumer you serve.
Yep.
Okay. We talk about the Olay story in the book. We acquired Olay with Richardson Vicks in the mid-'80s. It was a good brand, all right? We built the brand from $100 million in sales in the mid-'80s to several hundred million in sales by the end of the '90s.
Right.
But what was going on? Our consumer base was aging. In the late '90s, the biggest segment was this anti-aging, anti-wrinkling segment. That was relevant and important to 50-year-olds and up. Okay, so we were in danger of shepherding a brand to the last user.
Sure.
And we said, gee, this has got to change. First, if we're going to become a real player in beauty care, we're going to have a global skincare business and brand. And secondly, we've got to find a way to relate to women of all ages. So the first thing we did is we did our consumer homework, and we learned that, guess what? Women at 30 and 35 are already starting to pay attention to different signs of aging. Drying skin, age spots, sun damage,
So
the list goes on. We did our homework
Yeah.
with consumers, and we moved the point of entry for anti-aging from 50 to 30 to 35. We created boutique lines of products that looked like and performed better than the best prestige products, and then we sold them at a price point between prestige and mass, and we sold them in mass channels, so they were accessible.
So you bumped the price up, really.
It was unbelievable.
Yeah,
it was unbelievable. So all of a sudden, Olay that was selling for $5 to $10 over the next 6 years, we introduced 4 boutiques, Total Effects, Regenerist, Definity, and Pro X, all of a sudden Olay's price ranged from $15 to $60.
Sure.
The product was fantastic. And all of a sudden we had a business that was $2.5 billion instead of $500 million.
So there you go. That's change with
That was a lot of change, and we connected to a changing consumer base and, frankly, a changing set of needs and dynamics.
Yep. Last quick question. Global brands, obviously,
Yes.
was the world that, P&G certainly played in. A lot of other companies these days are. How has the definition of a global brand, a truly global brand, evolved over the years as well?
Wow, that's a big question. I guess I'd say two things. One, in our consumer household care and personal care categories, most of the consumers make very local decisions for themselves. They shop very locally, and they're influenced by a lot of stimuli in the store and advertising and publicity that's pretty local. And you always have to remind yourself of that.
Sure.
So when you have a brand that you think has the potential to be global, you have to make sure you can connect it locally to the consumer. And I think at P&G, we were most successful when we kept our finger on the pulse of the local consumer. We're willing to create products in our line, and price points and packaging offerings that appealed locally. And at the same time, we were able to create an image and have a single promise that was universal and applied really on a worldwide basis. It was a delicate balance.
Definitely. And that still applies today, obviously.
Still a delicate balance.
Yeah.